Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to another episode of the Iron Life Podcast. I am your host, Chris Tutela, here to help you live the Iron Life. So it's been a few weeks since my last episode, and that is because Gabriella and I found out that we are having our first baby. We got a baby boy on the way, baby Tutela, and he is due in May of 2023. May 22nd, I believe, is the due date. And we are both pumped, as you could imagine. So it's been a wild couple of weeks letting people know, sharing the news, and just kind of gathering our thoughts and taking some time to ourselves over the last few weeks and enjoying this process. It's been really amazing. And to know that we're having a baby boy, I'm even more fired up. I would have been fired up either way. But to know that I have a baby boy on the way, I mean, come on. I couldn't be more excited and happier. And, you know, it's been a really rough year. You know, you guys know, if you've been an active listener to the show, you know that I lost my brother back in February. And just 15 months prior to that, I lost my dad. And it's been a rough couple of years. So having some good news is just really, and this kind of good news, right? It's just really, really exciting. And, you know, I just wanted to kick this episode off by sharing that with you guys, to let you know where I've been, and also just to share some good news during the holiday season here. And speaking of the holiday season, we're going to get right into it here. Listen, so the first thing that I want to talk about is over the holidays, over the next couple of weeks, we don't have to make this an ordeal where you gain 20 pounds of body fat. I mean, it's unacceptable. You don't have to pack on tons of body fat during the holidays. The important thing, and one of the best ways to do that, right? Like, if we're just giving you a general layout here, a general blueprint of what you can do to stay lean throughout the holidays, the first thing is make sure that those cheat meals on the holidays don't roll over the weekend and the next week, and you're eating leftovers for 2 weeks in a row. That is how you put on a ton of body fat over the holidays. So just keep your eating. You could enjoy, right? If you're going to have some booze, if you're going to have some desserts, if you're going to have a little managot like me and my Italian family, then keep it to that day, enjoy, but then you're right back on the fucking horse the next day. Don't make it a 3-week thing, okay? That's unacceptable. That's just, you're making an excuse for just lazy behavior, lazy dieting. So just remember, you don't have to starve yourself or deprive yourself over the holidays, but you eat your meal, you eat some dessert, and then you're done. If you celebrate Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, you do the same thing, but then you're done after that. And as long as you do that, you're going to be fine. Outside of those days, you keep your diet exactly the same. The same principles that we talk about all the time. You eat real food. Let's make it a priority to get at least 4 healthy meals in per day. Each meal has a source of lean protein, right? We're shooting for about 0.7 or 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. So if you do that over 4 meals or 5 meals or 6 meals, whatever floats your boat, you're getting your at least 2 servings of green veggies in. You're getting at least 1 serving of a starchy carbohydrate, whether it be sweet potato or baked potato or rice or oats. And then you're getting 1 to 2 servings of fruit, right? And that's a very general layout there. But if you're doing that and you're keeping your cheats to just the days, just the holidays, then you're going to be totally fine, right? I do personally like to train on holidays. So like Christmas Eve, I will probably go train in the morning before the feast, and then I'll do the same thing on Christmas Day. Typically, it's strength workouts. I don't normally train back to back. So Christmas Eve, I don't even know what day Christmas Eve falls. I got to check and see my training schedule. But I'll typically train on Christmas Eve, and then Christmas Day, I'll do some type of conditioning in the morning, and then I'm good, and then I follow the same things that I normally do. Fasted walk in the morning, make sure you're drinking water, half your body weight in ounces per day. I mean, you guys heard me say this ad nauseum, so I don't need to go into it. But the big thing to stay lean, just don't over fucking do it. Keep your cheat meals to the days of the holidays. Beat that into your brain. It's not going beyond that, and as long as you do, you're going to be totally fine, and you're not going to gain 30 pounds of body fat like an asshole over the next couple of weeks, right? So with that said, after the holidays, because this is not an ideal time to try and get super lean. If your goal, you're listening to the show, I'm sure you want to drop some body fat, you want to look better, you want to get leaner, maybe you want visible abs. Well, that usually begins in January. Now, let me take a sip of water here before I get to my next point. Excuse me. So, first off, it depends where you're at. If you're somebody who hasn't done shit, then don't wait until anything. Just get up and get your ass moving right now. There's no reason to wait for anything because you've been waiting for the last 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. Get up, start this process, do everything that I just told you to do a minute ago. But if you're somebody who's a little bit more advanced and you've been training, your diet is pretty dialed in, and your goal is to get abs this year, then I wouldn't start that process or that diet, because if you're listening to the show, then you probably already know that your diet is going to dictate how lean you get. So if you are someone who fits that mold, fits that description, and your goal is to get abs this year, then after you do your holiday eating, you clean it up a little bit, then we could start actually doing some hard dieting. Because if you're going to get down to single-digit body fat, if you're going to have visible abs, or if you're going to get even like super lean, like low single digits, and you're going to get shredded, then you need to get pretty fucking rigid with your diet, pretty detailed, dialed in, on point, with no cheat meals for typically, depending on how lean you are, maybe 12 weeks, maybe 16 weeks. It really depends, right? But you're going to have to go balls to the wall. You're going to have to dial in your discipline. So with that said, when you are ready to begin your fat loss phase, and you're going to start training specifically for fat loss to get shredded for Memorial Day weekend, son, then I want to go over today a few key mistakes that people will make, because like when I say eat real food, like that's the general guideline, right? But there are some real foods that are not great to be on your menu during a fat loss phase. All right. So I want to go through a couple of these foods with you so you can write them down and make sure that once you begin an actual like balls to the wall cut. I'm not saying like if you're someone who is just new to the game and getting rolling, these things are completely fine. And if you're just like cutting out sugar and cutting out flour and processed foods and industrial seed oils, and you're cutting all that bullshit out, and you just start eating real food, you're going to start seeing a ton of progress. So don't even ignore what I'm going to say. But for those of you who are more advanced and you're looking to get shredded, then pay attention. So first off, you know that if you're going to get lean, we got to be in a calorie deficit, right? Now, there are some real foods that can easily knock us out of our calorie deficit, right? That are real food, technically, but their calories, right? Or let me rephrase that. But because these foods are very easy to overeat, they can knock us out of our calorie deficit. So the first three things I have listed here are raisins, dates, and dried fruit. So all three of those things, like once in a while, you might make a smoothie with some dates. You might have, like a homemade trail mix where you get some nuts, some raisins. You might grab some dried fruit if you're on the go, which is normally totally fine. But if you are really trying to dial in and get shredded, then those things are very easy to overeat. And the sugar content in those foods can easily knock you out of your calorie deficit. So for that reason, I would suggest not having those foods in your diet during a fat loss phase. Once you're out of that fat loss phase, you get back to maintenance, you want to sprinkle those things in. They're still very easy to overeat. So I don't recommend having, don't just like have a bag with you at all times and you're just dipping your hand in the bag. I've done that. And that's just, it's not going to help you overall, because depending on what your goal is, but if you're just overeating a ton of sugar, that's not a good look, right? So raisins, dates, dried fruit. Now here's another big one, okay? Because we talk about all the time making sure that you have enough lean protein and getting a lean source of protein at each meal. But the key word there is lean. And oftentimes what people will do is they will eat high-fat meats, okay? So you might have a ribeye steak. You might have some pork. You might have, turkey, ground turkey. That's not the breast. So typically for most people, now, again, doesn't mean that you can't get lean with these foods worked into your diet. I just want to make it clear, like if you're very detailed and dialed in on your calories, what I'm trying to tell you is that these foods can easily knock you out of your calorie deficit if you aren't careful. So you just have to be mindful of what you're consuming. But for me, for that reason, I just don't even like to include these foods to make my life a lot easier. So high-fat meats are obviously, they're high in fat. So what does that mean? They're much higher in calories than, if you were to eat a chicken breast or like a filet mignon or, a piece of if you're going to have ground beef, like 96% lean ground beef. If you're going to have that, it's much easier to be aware of how much protein you're taking in. The fat calories aren't really an issue, and it's unlikely to knock you out of your calorie deficit. So for that reason, I do not like to include high-fat meats on my diet when I'm cutting. So for me, I will eat chicken breast. I will typically eat ground turkey breast. I will eat 96% lean ground beef. I have eggs, and that's another thing with eggs. I'm not saying you shouldn't have eggs. That they actually are a staple, even on my fat loss cycle. But you got to be careful of how many whole eggs you're consuming as well. So you don't want to go overboard and crack like 5 or 6 whole eggs in there. It's a lot of excess fat. So 2 or 3 whole eggs, and then for more protein, you add in the extra egg whites, and then it's a non-issue. But just be mindful of the meats that you're consuming. If they're not super lean, they could easily knock you out of your calorie deficit. And I've seen that happen over and over again with coaching clients. So just be really aware of that. Another thing is legumes. So the thing with legumes is just like proteins, right? Like if you're going to have a protein that's also dense in fat, it could easily knock you out of your calorie deficit. But the same thing, if you're eating legumes for a source of protein, the carbohydrate intake can also knock you out of your calorie deficit. So again, you just have to be mindful. Doesn't mean it can't be done. It's just very easy to let these calories kind of just creep up on you and you're not recognizing it. So that's why I don't like to do legumes when I'm on a strict cut phase. Another thing is dark chocolate. Dark chocolate is super delicious. It can be done. I like to have a square or 2 or 3 of dark chocolate every night. Not every night. I shouldn't say every night, but once in a while in the evening, I'll do that. But if you go overboard with that, again, you're getting some fat calories. You're getting some calories that aren't really going to help you on the fat loss process. But the thing is, like, if you're someone who has a really bad sweet tooth or a really bad sweet craving, if that helps you, but listen, sometimes you gotta just roll. Like if you're trying to get super lean, you gotta, like, there's not many bodybuilders that are getting shredded to the bone and they're eating dark chocolate every night, right, as a staple. So it just depends on you and how lean you want to get. But that's one of the things I would avoid. Now, the next two here, so I have nuts and nut butters, and I have cooking oil. So here's the thing. I personally do like to have nuts while I'm cutting, and I also will use some nut butter. Like typically, I will get my fat from nuts, nut butters, from some of the cooking oil, which is next on my list, from whole eggs. Like that's primarily where I get my fat when I'm cutting. But again, just like the other foods that I mentioned first, it's very easy to overeat, especially nut butter. Like you could eat a jar of nut butter and you're trying to justify it. Like it's only a tablespoon, bro. Like, yeah, it's half a fucking jar, dude. It's not a tablespoon. So you got to be mindful. And raw organic nuts is the way to go. Of course, if you're eating a nut butter, it should go without saying. It should be a natural nut butter. The only ingredient should be the nut or the nut and salt. There shouldn't be any extra oils or sugar or anything like that added. But if you're going to do it, you got to be really strict and really disciplined on your consumption. Like I'll typically do a quarter cup of nuts in the evening. I will do a tablespoon of an almond butter. Occasionally I'll work in that peanut butter, even though it's not the best thing for you, but I'll work in that peanut butter. So again, it's one of those things where the calories could creep up on you if you overdo it with nuts and nut butters. So be mindful. And the same thing with cooking oil. Now, I do like to get some of my fat from olive oil and coconut oil, but it's the same thing. Be aware of the amount you're using. Don't just start dousing the pan with olive oil or coconut oil. Just because it's a better oil still doesn't mean you don't want to overconsume it. And like if you're someone who puts maybe oil on your rice or something like that, like I typically do that when I'm not cutting is I'll put a drizzle of olive oil, some pink Himalayan salt, or I'll do it with coconut oil, and then I'll mix that into my rice, and that makes it a lot more flavorful. But when I'm cutting, I do not do that for the reasons that we're talking about today. So be aware of those things, guys. But raisins, dates, dried fruit, high-fat meats, legumes, dark chocolate, nuts and nut butters, cooking oil, those are the things that, again, could be done. You could still get lean if you're very dialed in on your calories, but they're just going to impede your progress rather than helping you when you're trying to get down to that single-digit shredded look. So just be aware of that. Now, at the end of the day, general nutrition quality is still the most important thing. We want to focus on micronutrients, but when you're getting lean, if you want to gain size, like whatever your goal is, the amount you're eating matters, right? So the amount of calories matter, but quality is always the first thing. Like, are we eating enough of the right foods to make sure that, we're working against, I should say, any nutrient deficiencies you may have, or to prevent any nutrient deficiencies. And just making sure you're getting the right nutrient intake rather than getting processed bullshit. So quality is important, but the calories also matter. So when we're talking about like what to do after the fat loss phase, it's like just shifting back into the general principles, right? So you might get really dialed in for 8, 12, 16 weeks or whatever to get shredded. But once you achieve your goal, does that mean you start eating pizza and shit? Of course not. You go right back to just the general principles. Maybe you have a little bit more flexibility there. But you still need to stay pretty rigid to maintain, depending on how lean you get. But eat real food. That's always the most important thing. That's why we talk about it so much. But again, I just wanted to go over this list with you guys to make sure that you don't overconsume and get stuck and hit that frustrating fat loss plateau. And you're like, why can't I get past this? I'm eating the right foods. I'm eating pretty healthy. What's going on? Well, if you're eating those things that I mentioned, or guys, here's the other thing. If you're drinking calories, so like if you're putting cream or something in your coffee, like you shouldn't be doing sugar regardless. Like if you're trying to get shredded, you should know better. But if you're doing like a little bit of cream, like stuff like that, that could also knock you out of your calorie deficit without you recognizing it. So to get shredded, you have to get more detailed. You have to be more dialed in. But it's always going to depend on where you stand right now to determine where you should start. Because if you got about 60 pounds of fat to lose, just eat real food, eat well, eat healthy. You're going to start seeing the fat come off. If you're advanced and you want to get shredded, you want to get dialed in, then we have to get a little bit more detailed and focused. And that's where you have to be really mindful of these foods while you're in that specific phase. So hopefully that all makes sense to you guys. And yeah, I'm excited for all of you and to hear about your progress. Always listen, guys, if you have questions for me, if you want me to answer questions on the show, if you have a specific topic that you want me to cover, or if you just have a question you want to ask me personally, feel free to shoot me over a DM on Instagram. I'm at Chris_Tutela. So shoot me a DM on Instagram. Follow me. I always put up as much content as I can to try to help you guys on your journeys here, on your process. And just trying to give you guys some real fitness advice because there's a lot of bullshit out there that we're seeing. And now the Liver King got exposed, all that crazy shit's going on. So anyway, yeah, if you want some real content, you need some help on anything, follow me on Instagram, shoot me a DM. Always appreciate you guys listening. And if you have a quick second to leave a 5-star or written review on iTunes, just take a second out of your day. It's really the best way to help grow the show and contribute to our mission here. So thank you in advance for that. I appreciate you guys, and I'll catch you next week on another episode of the Iron Life Podcast. Peace!